Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is resemble. And this verb was suggested by the viewer Luis. Luis, thank you so much for making this suggestion. Now let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or the ways that we can use this verb. The first way you'll encounter the verb resemble means to have qualities or features, especially those of appearance, in common with someone or something. When I think of this verb, I think of different people I have met and how much they look like their mother, their father, maybe grandmother, grandfather, or other siblings. So that's a really common way to use this verb resemble. So kind of judging someone's features, quite often their appearance, but it doesn't always have to be things that you see. It could be sort of qualities or mannerisms. They do something in a way that's very similar to someone else. And that connects to our second definition. This could be to look or seem like. So again, something is making you think, these two things are quite similar, or these two people are quite similar. For now, you should know that resemble is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E on the end and add ing. That forms resembling. The past tense and the participle form of our verb can be made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Now, the base verb, resemble, ends in a voiced L sound. This means the ed ending is just going to make a D or a D sound. So we're not adding an extra syllable to the verb when we say it. The past tense and the participle form of the verb should sound like this. Resembled. Resembled. Okay. I do have one phrasal verb for us to discuss. The meaning here is not very different than what we've already discussed, but I always think it's nice to have an example here. So the phrasal verb you might see is to resemble in. And what it means is to bear resemblance to or seem quite like someone in some or something in some aspect, a manner, or regard. So again, we're finding things that seem very alike. So an example of this in a sentence might be, the new show resembles a 1960s sitcom in its pacing and aesthetic. So here, maybe we're talking about a new TV show in 2025, and someone's saying it seems very similar to situation comedies, that's the word sitcom, as they were made in a very different era. Now let's continue using our verb of the day, resemble, and we'll practice in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the past perfect and the simple present. Let's start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about a completed action, but what makes it different than just the simple past tense is that we're noting that this action occurred before a certain point in time or before another action. To make sentences in the past perfect, we're going to follow the same pattern, no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, we'll start with our subject, we'll use had, and then our participle form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example. The mole had resembled a little black dot one day, but by the next week, it quadrupled in size. So here we're talking about like a little mark on someone's skin, right? They can occur all over the human body. And it can be a sign sometimes of skin cancer, especially if something is growing. And it sounds like that particular one was maybe a little dangerous there. So quadruple meaning like 4 times its size. Now let's talk about negative past perfect sentences. To do this, we again start with our subject. We use had not and then the participle. You might also see the contraction hadn't and then the participle. Here's another example. The crime scene had not resembled a legitimate burglary, which made investigators skeptical of the witness's story. So here, again, we can kind of note we've got two actions occurring, right? So what did this thing look like at the time it happened? And then the reaction of investigators later, it made them go like, I don't know if I believe what this person is saying. Finally, let's take a look at making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, start with had, then you'll have your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Had his performance resembled other greats before the season? When I went looking for examples of resemble, I saw it being used a lot in connection to sports. And I think that's probably because there's always this comparison. So we have incredible athletes competing today, and many people like to think about, well, how would this person performed against the great in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, etc. So that maybe is what that question is getting to. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about our habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts. Okay? And the simple present is a verb tense where we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, just use the base verb in the affirmative right after. So subject, base verb. But if your subject is he, she, or it, you want to add an S to the end of the verb. So in the affirmative, you'll see our subject and then the verb with an S on the end of it. You can see that in my example here. She resembles her grandmother in the way she pampers guests. So here, maybe she just kind of goes over the top when someone comes to visit. Maybe it's in making food, offering them fine things or relaxing touches to really make them feel at home. Now, if you want to make a negative simple present sentence, again, pay attention to your subject. If your subject is I, you, we, or they, use do not and then the base verb. But if your subject is he, she, or it, use does not and then the base verb. Notice I'm not adding an S to the end of the verb here in the negative. Here's another example. The new statue of Queen Elizabeth does not resemble her in any shape or form. So this was a sentence that came out of the news in the last year, and this happens sometimes. I can think of a few instances actually in the last year where a statue of a very famous, prominent person has been unveiled, and it makes people go like, oh, they didn't look like that, right? They didn't resemble. So now let's move on and look at a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, start with do or does, then you're going to have your subject and then that base verb. Okay? Again, we will not add an S to the end of the verb in our yes or no questions. Here's my last example. Do you resemble your parents? And that might be a great time, if you're still watching here, to leave a comment, and you can use our verb of the day in answering that question. As a child, many people told me I resembled my dad, but now, as an adult, many people say, oh, you resemble or you look like your mother. So, now let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb resemble. And I actually used this noun form of our verb earlier when we were looking at phrasal verbs. So you might encounter the noun resemblance. This is the state of resembling or being alike. So an example of this. This piece of art has some resemblance to Impressionist works. So it's saying these things look alike. And then a second way to use the noun resemblance can mean mean a way in which two or more things are alike. So, example of this. The facial resemblances between you two are unbelievable, right? So maybe these are two cousins or even two people who aren't related, but they really share so many common features. One more word for us today. It's the adjective resemblant. So Naturally, this means having a resemblance or having a similarity. An example of this. The defenders displayed grins that stretched end to end, perfectly resemblant of the way they had just covered the field end to end. So I borrowed this sentence from another newspaper article. I think it was talking about some high school athletes, and I can't remember if it was American football or soccer, but either one would work here, that they were so proud of the way they had played. Their big smiles after the game, and they're saying those big smiles that are sort of going from end to end remind them of the way they were covering and defending the field. Thanks again to Luis for suggesting today's verb, and I thank you all for watching. Have a great day.